Okay, so now it's 2 minutes past 3 according to my clock. No, it's still 1, so we still have 1 minute. I am going ahead of time a little bit. We just have a quite ambitious agenda for today, so we want to make the best out of our time together. So please bear with us. It's quite a challenge, but we said like, yeah, we can totally manage. So we hope that you guys will get a lot out of this session as well. So yeah, now it's 2 minutes past 3. So we don't want to delay this too much because our intention is to have the opportunity to have a dialogue with all of you, with all the participants. So the later we start, the less time we have to work all together. So first of everything, please let me introduce myself. My name is Ginny Guillen Hanson. I am a co-chair of the steering committee of the System Sustainable Consumption and Production CAN. And I'm also a member of the Working Group on Communication. And today I have the privilege to be the host for this session. That is being recorded. So welcome everybody. We hope you will enjoy this session and that there will be very useful insights. So before we kick off, I would like to share some practicalities. This session, as you can notice already, is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on camera, please keep it off. And of course, at some point, we would like you to open it to take a picture of all of us together, but it's not mandatory. We'll be using, as I was saying, we have a very, very how to say that, ambitious agenda for today. So you see that we will be going through a quick style impulse. So it will not be your typical 15-minute conversation and so on. Each of us will be presenting in a very short time, and we won't have Q&A right after, but at the very end, we will have an open discussion with all of you to touch upon all the topics that we'll be discussing. However, we know that it can get a little bit too much. So if you want to type down your questions, your comments, your ideas, suggestions to the chat, please do that. We'll really appreciate it. We will touch upon them once we have all the discussion as a group, and it's also very helpful for us to know what's going on in your minds as we speak or after we speak. Please keep your microphone muted at all times. I know some of us tend to open and close our mics by accident, but please keep an eye on that. And for those who are in Slack, please feel free to join the channel. You can see is hashtag 2022 _conference _day 2, and the conversation can go on over there. So before I pass on to the next speaker, you can see the program today is divided in 3 parts. The first part has a, let's say, strong theoretical focus, and it will be delivered by Daniel, Stefan, and yours truly. The second part has the input from Philip, Ashley, and Valentina, and it's a lot of hands-on. It's looking into the practice of communicating and educating sustainable consumption. And then comes the third part, in which you will be the ones doing the show, because it will be a discussion among all of us. So that said, if you have any comments, again, please feel free to share via the chat. And with that, I will stop sharing because it's now Daniel starting. Thank you, Daniel, you're on.
Thank you, Jeannie. And let me pull up my screen real quick. I hope you can see my slides. Great. Okay, then, yeah, welcome from my side as well. I'm Daniel Fischer. I'm Associate Professor at the University of Wageningen, focusing on consumer communication and sustainability. And yeah, I'm excited to kick off our session today with the first kind of content perspective. But before I dive into content, I would like to briefly outline what we are going to do, but Jeannie kind of already touched on that. So we have the first part, which is a bit more academically focused, and the second part, which has a stronger action focus. And we have two main questions that we want to pursue. One is to understand the different ways in which communication and education can facilitate sustainable consumption. And the second is also sharing evidence about the evidence that we have from our experiences, from our research about basically what works in promoting sustainable consumption. So with that being said, let me open up by a first question, because we're very interested in your perspectives. And I've shared a link already in the chat to WooClap. So we would like to hear from you one example maybe of what you consider to be communication for sustainable lifestyles. It can be a project, an idea, something you associate with the idea of communication for sustainable lifestyles. So you should be able to just a little sticky note at the bottom and create a new one. If everyone could just put in one idea, that would be awesome. So I'll give you 1 minute or see what you come up with. Ursula, you're asking for the prompt. So any example that you have, what do you associate with communication for sustainable lifestyles? Just an example, what comes to your mind? Okay. Great, I see some examples popping in, so maybe I can already start commenting on that, on those. So Patagonia's campaign to not buy a jacket, you may have heard about that, might be an example. We have repair offers of several outdoor producers. We have QR codes providing background information on the sustainable use of a product, and we have Vodafone's phone take back program. As a couple of examples, what you associate with communication for sustainable lifestyles. Please feel free to add some more as we keep going with this session, because we have an interaction part in the second part of this session where we will come back to this. So one more question to you. If you had 25 characters, which is basically 3 words, to summarize your insights on what makes communication and education effective, yeah, in leveraging sustainable consumption, what would that insight be? So please type your answer, 25 characters, something like tailoring to target group is an effective, is a factor that makes communication effective. What other factors can you come up with? And you see, yeah, half a minute for that, so real quick. All right, finishing up, final seconds. All right, thanks so much for following along in this rat race here of putting some ideas out. So we see emotions is a big thing that came up, to be user-centric and simple in what we do. Addressing emotions could also be subsumed under emotions. Consistency, persistency, speaking the language of probably the target group, participatory, right channels, and easy to read. So, and transparency. So some really good ideas. And again, that speaks to the what question of our session today. And again, we'll come back to that in the second part of this session. So let me come back to my presentation to introduce kind of different ideas and approaches that communication, communication can support sustainable consumption. We basically started in this working group asking this very general question: how can communication and sustainable consumption cross fertilize each other, and so that we make that relationship less difficult than you can see here. What we did was we conducted...
Daniel?
Yeah?
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I don't know if the others can see your screen. I can't. I only see a black screen with your name.
Oh, okay. Let me try to
So you could please share your screen again?
Yes, of course.
I can see
Can
it.
everybody see Daniel's screen?
Yeah.
I can see it,
Okay.
Yeah, we can see.
So thank you, Daniel. Carry on then.
Okay, then let me continue. So we have conducted a systematic review of academic papers to understand how communication and sustainable consumption are studied in relation to each other. And that paper is out since 2021, and you can download it for free. It's open access paper. And yeah, we found a number of studies that we analyzed to better understand how these relationships play out. And basically what we did with all these studies is we looked at 3 different aspects, basically, to sort these different studies and approaches. One is we asked, what is the route to change that these papers study? Yeah, is that the central route, basically engaging our communication partners with arguments, trying to convince them, to persuade them by providing compelling, basically, arguments? Or are we using cues, and trying to more subtly induce behavioral changes in our target group? So are we confronting them with arguments, or is it more subtle, our route to change? The second thing we looked at is, who are we addressing actually? Are those individual consumers, for example, or are we working more towards changing and shifting systems of sustainable consumption and production? So what is the unit of change in those papers? And the third dimension was the communication mode. And that means, do we just communicate our understanding of, or are there certain understandings of sustainable consumption communicated? That would be communication of. Is the paper looking at how meaning making takes place? So how people interact about what sustainable consumption could mean in a specific context? That would be communication about sustainable consumption. And the last communication mode that we looked at is more discourse oriented. So analytical studies or communication studies that try to understand how ideas of sustainable consumption actually emerge and are shaped in communication. So discourse analysis, basically. So we looked at these different combinations, and just to show you that this is an academic paper, we tried to build a typology by combining them and by then looking which papers actually fit into which type, and then we had to drop some types, and we ended up basically with 4 types. And I want to show you these 4 types real quick. The first type is communication for behavior change. And this was the most frequent type that we found in the literature. It was also the youngest type that we found in the literature. And you see that this type of communication research is really geared towards individual consumers changing their behaviors, basically, often also using techniques like nudging or social marketing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about providing a strong argument. It can be about nudging them to more sustainable consumption behaviors. The second type of relationship we found was communication for self-empowerment. Again, the focus was on individuals, but the difference here was that this was really about triggering high elaboration processes, getting consumers to really think about those issues, some more education, say. And that is the second type we found, but way less frequent. The third type looked at systems change. For example, how are labeling schemes developed? Which parties come together? How do they negotiate what should be part of a labeling scheme? As an example, the idea here is not to change individuals, but to work towards collective changes. And the last type we found engaged very critically with the idea of sustainability, of responsibility, of the focus on consumption as a way to achieve greater sustainability transformations. So quite a critical kind of perspective on sustainable consumption and more discourse oriented. And that's why we called it communication constructions, because it looks at how the meaning and ideas of sustainable consumption are constructed in communication discourse. So these are the 4 types we found, and you see that the critical one is actually the oldest one that we found, and the behavior change one is the youngest one we found, and also the most strongest one. And that's my final slide to basically summarize what we can take from this overview. We can see that there is not just one way of communication for sustainable lifestyles. Yeah, it depends on, do you provide arguments? Do you work towards subtle change? Do you focus on the individual or the collective? What kind of communication do you look at? So there are different ways of how communication can contribute. We also found that most studies really looked at only weak sustainable consumption changes. So just buying slightly different products instead of challenging more systemic aspects of unsustainability. And we found that most communication research we found was very instrumental. It really tried to induce very specific changes, and we saw only very little critical communication research that looked at how meaning making takes place around sustainable consumption. So that as a quick primer for also our session to come, and I think the different contributions of that session also reflect these different tensions and approaches in the field quite nicely. And with that, I'll hand over back to Ginny.
Thank you, Daniel. It was very insightful and right on time. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we want this to be a very interactive session. However, the first part will be mainly just presentations from our side, and then we will have the chance to get together and to have like a deeper discussion. However, thank you, Daniel, for such a big conversation starter. So if you already have some questions, some thoughts, ideas, please write them down in the chat so we can get back to them. And then I would like to invite Stefan to share your screen. And the moment you start sharing, your time starts, okay?
Okay, sure. 1 second, I start sharing. Do you see my screen now? So I have to start the presentation, I think. Okay, so you see everything. Thank you. Hi, my name is Stefan Wojciechowski. I'm a researcher and lecturer at Bochum University of Applied Sciences and also at Leuphana University Lüneburg in Germany. And I would like to give you a really short introduction into my own research project, which is called Sustainable Consumption from Gender Perspective. And my presentation is titled Unsustainable Clothing Consumption from Gender Perspective, Implications for Sustainable Consumption Communication. The idea of my research project is to combine 3 more or less unrelated areas of research right now. It's on the one hand, sustainable consumption communication, what is the topic of our session today, but then it's also the area of gender studies and then transfer to the area of clothing consumption. And the idea is to investigate the impact of gender on sustainable or unsustainable clothing consumption patterns and to derive implications for gender-sensitive sustainable consumption communication. And yeah, we think a gender perspective on sustainable consumption communication could be interesting first, because from classical marketing research, we know that communication aiming to shape consumption works best if it is tailored to specific target groups. And on the other hand, also gender is an important segmentation criterion in commercial marketing due to large differences that we see in consumption behavior between men and women. But this connection between sustainable consumption communication and gender is barely researched yet. And we focus on the clothing industry to get it down to a more handleable situation. And we choose the clothing sector for 2 reasons. On the first hand, the textile industry is a rather unsustainable industry where a transformation of consumption patterns is urgently needed. And it's also an industry or a sector of consumption where the behavioral differences between the sexes are very pronounced. So it's a particularly gendered industry. I did 2 studies. The first one is a quantitative study, which just aimed at exploring sex differences in unsustainable clothing consumption from a strong sustainable consumption perspective, and to examine whether these differences are really culturally determined. So if they're really due to gender role orientations and not to biological processes or whatever. And for doing so, I did a survey where I asked for various aspects of strong sustainable clothing consumption, which also included a BAM sexual inventory and of course some social demographics. And I had over 3,000 participants from Germany. And I analyzed my data with Bayesian structural equation modeling. And the most important results, first, I can see a lot of significant sex differences in almost all aspects of unsustainable or sustainable clothing consumption that I investigated. And to bring it down, I found 3 general patterns. The first one is I found that women consume clothes generally more environmentally friendly when they choose, for example, they choose more fair trade, more organic materials or whatever. Women consume clothes also more socially responsible. For example, they choose more fair trade clothes, but men consume clothes more sufficiently, are more need-oriented and consume less clothes in general. And what I also found, if I put this into a mediation model, I find that these sex differences are largely mediated by individual gender orientation. So the adherence to cultural conceptions of masculinity or femininity that trigger these differences. And to get a deeper understanding of this, I did a qualitative second study, which is based on focus groups, where I tried to reconstruct these gender stereotypes of masculinity and femininity in clothing consumption, and where I tried to examine how these gender stereotypes then drive these sex-specific patterns and how they trigger sex-specific barriers to sustainable clothing consumption. And I did 14 focus groups, and I ran a thematic analysis on them, and I found a lot of themes, but the two core themes regarding gender stereotypes, regarding femininity in clothing, I found a theme that I called female fashionista. It's about women being really interested in fashion, being interested on looking good, being interested on having the latest trends in clothing. And that's how femininity in clothing consumption seems to be constructed, at least in the German society. And regarding masculinity in clothing consumption, I found a theme that I called the careless shopper, because it's some kind of men don't really care about fashion, not so much care about clothes, but they also consume careless in the sense that they don't care what they buy. They don't look, is this organic or is it fair trade? They just buy what very efficiently and then quit shopping because they don't have any interested in it. So they're careless in any sense. And then I found, of course, some themes regarding sustainability barriers for sustainable consumption. Regarding men, it was this type of carelessness due to disinterest, because they're not interested in clothes. They don't do any research. Where can they get, for example, fair trade clothes, organic clothes? So they don't care because they are not interested in it. There's also was some kind of theme about around men being incompetent in clothing consumption, so being incompetent to even find sustainable alternatives. And then we found this well-known green feminine stereotype, which also is shown in other studies, that it's some kind of being caring about the environment, is some kind of thought to be feminine, and men don't want to be considered as feminine, and then they don't buy ecological stuff or socially responsible stuff because they think it makes them feminine. And regarding sustainability barriers for women, I also found 3 themes. The first theme was around that many female participants had no really idea that sufficiency or strong sustainable consumption is really a part of sustainable consumption, because they think sustainable consumption is buying different products, more eco-friendly products, but they don't think about sustainability in terms of consumption levels. Then with female participants that some kind of have a feeling that they consume so much, they often frame it, that was the second theme, as part of their female nature. It's some kind like, I can't do anything else because women just have to shop. It's some kind of inner desire that I cannot stop. It's some kind of my biology as a woman. It's just part of my nature. That was a very interesting theme. And then there was a third theme around social pressures on females' appearances. So like, as a woman, I'm really judged how I look, and that's not happening with men. So I have to consume more clothes because I'm more judged on what I wear. And so that was a third theme around females being suppressed or being reduced to their outer appearance, that drives their clothing consumption. So what can we learn from this for sustainable consumption communication? I think we have some short-term and some long-term implications. In the short run, the focus may be on promoting eco-friendliness and social compatibility in clothing consumption decisions among men, and on focusing on promoting sufficiency in clothing consumption among women. So to help them to undo what is considered an doing gender in current society, despite these prevailing stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. And in the long run, the aim could be on the deconstruction of the stereotype of the female fashionista and the careless shopping man, to help them to shop or consume more sustainably, because there are no stereotypes that hinder them anymore. So yeah, that was my short introduction to my research project. I'm stopping screen sharing right now. I hope I'm on time.
Thank you, Stefan. Actually, you and Daniel did such a fantastic job keeping the time that maybe we can open, like, have about 4 to 5 minutes for some questions and answers, and we don't need to wait to the very end. So if anyone from our participants would like to ask any clarification or any question or comment to the first two presentations, we do have time for this. So Daniel, Stefan, anyone would like to say anything about the last two presentations that we saw? No comment so far? Okay, because I would like to very briefly oh, there is someone, hold on. What about the role of the seller? Yeah, thank you for your question, Aden. Is it for Stefan, I would imagine, or you also would like Daniel to say something? Was it for Stefan? For both, excellent. So who would like to go first?
I can. So I did not really look at the role of the seller, but I think the thing is, we are living in a consumerist society. So it's often that sellers don't have any incentive to promote sufficiency, for example, in clothing consumption. That's interesting because I also looked at examples for sustainable consumption communication aiming at men or aiming at women. And I found some examples on, for example, Levi's trying to make consumption choices of men that they don't buy the standard jeans, but to make them buying a more eco-friendly produced jeans. I found examples from this, but I don't find any aspects directed more on females trying to bring them to question their own consumption patterns, at least not from seller side. There are partly influencers or whatever who are doing so, but sellers don't have really an interest. There's this Patagonia, don't buy this jacket campaign, but that's the only company that ever did something in this direction, at least to my knowledge right now. So it's really, really hard because at least from the big players, it's not in their interest in the consumer society. So maybe Daniel want to add?
Yeah, maybe I can add a brief reflection because, yeah, we did a very high level kind of review study, but one interesting finding regarding the role of the seller is that most of the research we found, actually 2/3 of all papers, were looking at a very specific communication direction, and that is industry to consumer, right? Producer to consumer, basically, one-way communication. And we thought that this was quite telling. The only other communication type that showed more than once, I think, was government to consumers. But there was very little, that was pretty much a one-way street. There was very little two-way communication back from consumers to producers or consumers to each other or companies with each other. So there seems to be a very strong preoccupation of the field from users to consumers. And that is, I think, something that we can also critically discuss, but that is what we found as the predominant mode of studying communication for sustainable consumption.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. We also have a couple of comments here in the chat. Ursula is saying, this is such a fascinating piece of research, Stefan. Do you have any ideas of how would you challenge the gendered consumption of clothes?
Oh, that's such a great question, because it's so interesting, because that's exactly the question that I'm asking myself right now, and maybe where I try to make my next research project around, because it's so, on the one hand, okay, it's interesting to see the problem and to say, okay, it would be a good idea to deconstruct these gender stereotypes to make clothing consumption less gendered. But the question is, how can you do it? It's really, I'm really thinking about it. So I don't have yet an answer, but because the question is so great, but also tricky. And I think I'm really starting a project on it right now, but it's really, I have no good answer right yet, but the question is exactly the question that I also have in my mind.
Thank you, Stefan. We have another question from Adugna. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. Now we have back to our schedule. So if it's okay, please keep your question in there. We'll be able to talk about this and many other questions later, because now we have another presentation. So just let me see. Can you see my screen? No, you can't. So now it's me presenting. I will try to keep my time as good as my colleagues did. Here we go. So we are kicking off. So today's my input is about gamified apps for sustainable consumption, and it raises a question if they are actually practice shifters or like making paradox. And it's a little bit of I know what you did last summer kind of story, but actually dates back to 3 summers when I started my PhD, wondering in what ways is gamification supporting the communication of sustainable consumption, even endorsing the shifts into sustainable practices. And just as a very quick refresher, because usually we tend to think that gamification is mainly IT oriented, and the title of my research seems to be taking that direction, but I will explain you later how did that happen. The thing about gamification, it is not only about points, leaderboards, and badges. It is applying structures and activities similar to games to afford the motivations and the joyfulness or playfulness as good as game do in non-gaming context. So I love this quote from Cunningham and Sigerman, that is gamification is 75% psychology and 25% technology. Because yeah, in good measure, technology have helped gamification. But if you think back, for example, when you were going to school and you had your golden star or the employee of the month, these are examples of gamification, and you don't really need a lot of technology for that, right? So once I clarify that, let me just move on to the next slide, because as I said, I started my research with this idea like, okay, how is gamification supporting the communication of sustainable consumption or hindering it? And with that, I did a literature review that ended up with 55 publications about addressing the topic of how are the intention and the impact of using gamification for sustainable consumption presented in research. Like, how do we understand these both disciplines? And the results were quite interesting, because those that were talking about what is the intended use for gamification, they presented sustainability like an overriding majority of just environmental issues. And those that were also talking like more in detail about gamification, they presented it as a strategy or as a tool to like try to do something about the environment. So something that came across is that most of these were very weak narratives of sustainable consumption. So it was all about, you know, resource efficiency and technology use, and it was very, very oriented towards just the environment. And one may wonder like, okay, so the narrative, I mean, if we take back the findings of what Daniel was sharing about our literature review, most of this work on gamification is used for individual behavior change and self-empowerment, which kind of makes sense because these are some of the tenets of gamification strategies themselves. However, and I put them here at the bottom, we are not really looking into their potential for creating communication constructions. And we are aware that, for example, gaming communities are actually shaping social models already. So what can we do about it? How can we harness this opportunity? And also, well, how can gamification help us to communicate a system change, or actually make a change of system happen? Something that this first study showed as well is that most of the communication and most of gamification applied to sustainable consumption is done via apps. Either you're developing an app, testing them, or monitoring an app. So that's what led to the second study. That's what happened in the summer of 2021, that these two wonderful individuals, Daniel and Nevena, joined me in the search of like, okay, how gamified mobile apps present sustainable consumption, and what characteristics they have, what can we learn from them? So we actually found over 1,000 apps and ended up analyzing 67 of them. Of course, I'm not gonna show you all the results, but in a nutshell, we could see that it's all about waste. Like literally, over 90% of the apps, nearly 100% of them, were just talking about environmental impacts. Most of them were looking into actions for disposal, like helping you to recycle your stuff or where to find your recycling bins. And the lifestyle area that was the most addressed, of course, was waste. So we could see that also in here, the narrative that was repeated all over the place was resource efficiency. Everything was about making the best out of the resources that we've got, although some of the apps, particularly those that have like a lot of tips and, you know, like you can monitor your activities and so on, they start leaning also about towards more mindfulness, like, okay, where is your product coming from? What kind of impact it has? How are you going to dispose of it? Of course, there were several apps that were additional to collaborative schemes. There were a couple of them like exchanging clothes, for example, facilitating this. And in a very, very small degree, we could find some narratives of degrowth and almost nothing about sufficiency. And that also shows us something is going on over there. Also because some of the strategies that were used, most of the apps had in what we call internal rewards, that they could give you something like points or whatever, badges. And in some cases, they actually communicated very contradictory messages. It was like, oh, you collect your points and then you can get it for vouchers to go to our partners. And guess what? You can keep consuming. So rather than help you reducing consumption, these apps were kind of helping you feel good about, like how you donate your clothes and then you can just keep buying stuff. So there is something that also we found in several apps that the reward system was not very coherent or consistent with the message of sustainable consumption that they were supposed to be communicating, or at least that they show as intention of the app. So if we look at this, we see that how the whole intention of gamification for sustainable consumption, it's narrowing into this kind of funky funnel that we see here. It's, as Daniel mentioned, mainly one-way approach, that is an app that tries to persuade you for something, to have a focus on the environment only. And the main narrative is that, hey, we can keep the current lifestyle, technology is here to help you and to keep our economic well-being. It's also mainly about resource efficiency, reduce CO2, and how to waste management. So we see how from this broad intention, we're just narrowing. But this summer, I had the chance to speak in with 21 of the creators of these apps and learn a little bit more about what is behind their apps, what they are doing, and why they designed them the way they did. And we could see that most of them had the intention to encourage people to do something good, mainly for the environment, although a couple of them even mentioned the rebound effect. For me, it was like, wow, you're making my day. Most of them are intending to provide information to encourage people to do their own, to choose by themselves. Most of them say, like, we don't want to be preachy or judgmental. We just want people to be informed. And some of the tensions, of course, is that some of these people do not really have like a lot of, let's say, scientific knowledge. So they are always having this issue, like, how can we give trustworthy and reliable information and how it reflects in the development of my app and so on. So there are a lot of tensions that these guys face for making their apps. And as we can see, they are aware of the risk of a contradictory message. So that brings us to the point of how might we collaborate for developing apps that communicate and facilitate sustainable consumption in a way that makes sense. That we have the opportunity to really facilitate these transitions towards more sustainable ways of living, and not keep it in a superficial level, like feeling good because you're recycling your clothes. So we can see that if we start working together, like, as researchers, as practitioners, we can see that we can educate the creators, develop systemic narratives of sustainable consumption for which gamification can help us. And instead of having this funnel narrowing our opportunities, we can flip it and have this wonderful spying glass towards a more sustainable future in which gamification can help us to really develop conditions for forming more sustainable habits. And we can do it through apps, maybe. But one of the things that we found with this research is that app creators do need help, and we need to work together towards it. With that, I would like to thank you for listening and for your questions. And of course, I put a big question mark because this game is far of being over. And yes, we are now, I stopped sharing my screen. And we are now heading towards the second part. This is the last part about theory. So yes, it's a bit funny to do the transition from being the speaker to becoming the moderator again. So just quickly changing hat. Thank you. So if you have any comments about the last presentation, or I would actually suggest that we keep the wind on our sails and we continue with the next presentation. We have another, Philip, you can go next, and then we have another short round of Q&A. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. So I will share my screen.
And then I will put it, I hope you guys didn't hear my alarm telling me that I was on the time, but okay.
So
ready, Philip?
Can you hear and see me?
Yep.
Okay. So this presentation is called Listening Sessions with Residents on Climate Actions. My name is Philip Vergragt. I'm a climate activist in Newton, a former professor at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and associated with Clark University in the USA. And communication about climate is often not very effective. So basically, if you look at climate change issues, what you really want to achieve is that people are going to do something about their living, their houses, their transportation, and their food consumption, and buying less stuff. But in actual practice, if you're living in a city like Newton with 85,000 people, a suburb of Boston, how do you do that? If you communicate in one way, then maybe that doesn't seem to be very effective. And we think, as Daniel also explained in the literature review, that the major cause is that interests, preferences, and values of the target groups are not very well understood or investigated, which makes two-way communication a little bit problematic. So in this presentation, we want to explore and experiment in two-way communication in Newton. So Newton is, we call it the Climate Listening Project. And the original plan was to convene 4 focus groups consisting of randomly selected Newton citizens. The challenge is that if you try to collect residents in Newton to talk about climate change, you get the usual suspects. You get the people who are already green. And that was also what's happening to us up to a certain extent, but not so much. We also got a few climate deniers and people who are very critical about climate issues. So what we did was a survey as a first step. And then after that, we had 2 listening sessions. They were planned to be in person, but unfortunately, because of focus, we had to shift to an online mode. And then we presented our results to the mayor of Newton with her staff. And what I will do here is to give a very short version of this half-hour presentation, and then give a few reflections on what we did. So this is our presentation on May 31st, 2022, 4 people. These are the 4 collaborators in this project. The origins of the project, as I said, in a city with aggressive climate goals, educated people, and above average means, in other words, a rich city, why is adoption of climate-friendly actions so low? And we basically asked people about their perceptions, about their favorite communication channels, about action taken, and about barriers.
Philip, sorry, very quickly, would you like to share your slides? Because we just see you.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to share your slides, or I can share them. Sorry for interrupting. Is that I had the impression you wanted us to see something.
I thought I shared my screen, but
No, you are not sharing your screen.
Now I am trying to find my presentation.
I can share your presentation if you want.
Give me 1 second, please. Yeah, please you share it. Sorry about this.
No, now we can see your screen. We can see your email. We're seeing your screen, Philip.
Oh, you can see my screen?
Now we can see your screen, but not your presentation. Just we see your email address.
Okay, I will stop sharing.
Your email.
Why don't you?
I can share your presentation. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Hold on. Just give me 1 moment. And here we are. Ready? Okay. So in which slide do you want me to start?
The next quick frame. Well, wait. Go back. Go back.
Excellent.
1 more back.
Okay.
Please.
There we go.
So yeah, this is the project team. And then the next slide, 1 second, the next slide. So these are the project origins that I was just talking about. And the next slide. So these are the, these are some responses from the survey. And what you can see here is that people find climate change very important. They're very worried. They think that it will harm future generations. But for people personally, they are much less worried in Newton. So next slide, please. So these are actions that are already being taken by respondents. And what you can see is that that people often have done a home energy audit. Many people have insulated their houses. And people are buying 100% renewable energy, renewable electricity, but other actions they have done much less so. And you can also see that people have recommended the actions that they have taken in many cases to other people. But people installing heat pumps or whole house heat pumps or by install heat pump water heaters, much less so. Next slide, please. So what are the most important barriers? So no surprise that costs of home retrofitting or buying an electric car are the biggest barrier that is in the price house. But two other things were very interesting to hear, that people found the challenge being very complex and complicated. And another big issue was that they needed trusted guidance, which is hard to find. Next slide, please. So here you can see a few quotes from the listening sessions and the survey. Where to begin? I don't know where to begin. The technology is changing. Is it worth it? Is it effective? It's hard to find trusted guidance. Can we trust? Whom can we trust? And from my own experience, if you try to install a whole house heat pump, you ask 3 different contractors to give you a quote, they come up with 2 completely different ideas and systems, and also different amounts of money. Next slide, please. So these were the recommendations that we gave to the city, and I cannot go through all of them. But if you look at the lowest recommendations below the screen, stay close to residents' needs and interests. What we found out is that the city basically communicate very much in a one-way mode, and that they really don't know very much about the people who are receiving the communication and how to address their interest and their values. Next slide, please. So we gave this presentation to the mayor and her sustainability staff, and the mayor praised us, and she was very happy with the presentation and with the quality of it, of the research. But basically in a city where they have already a climate action plan implementation, very little has been done with our recommendations so far. So the city campaign is called For Our Future, and it's basically a rather traditional campaign with a website, billboards, presentations, tablings, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So this is what the website looks like. It is basically very nice, but it is very traditional. Those are the 4 main things that you can do: insulate your house, put PV on the roof, buy an electric vehicle, etc. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So we think that this listening project was successful in basically in an experiment in 2-way communication with randomly selected residents. And we got a better understanding of incentives for barriers to action and better understanding of what motivated citizens. But we so far have not been very successful in changing the city's communication strategy. 2-way communication is challenging, as we all know, and we think that a lot of resources, time and money are necessary to achieve success. But we keep trying, we keep collaborating with the city, and we slowly can move the city a little bit more in that direction. Next slide is, thank you very much. This is my contact information, and this is the link to the For Our Future action of the City of Newton, if you're interested. Sorry, I don't know how much time I took. I apologize for not sharing my screen in time, but this is it.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip. And don't worry, we are still having a pretty good time. So since we modified a little bit the structure, I would like now to open the floor for Q&A for the last 2 presentations. As you could see, the first one was still a lot in the theoretical side, easing up into the practitioner side. So now we have the first of the practice presentations, and yeah, the last one of the theory one. So are there any comments, questions? I see that, Anne, you're asking how to get the slides. I think we can just put them together and make them available to all the registered participants. We just need to see. Most of the work that we presented is already published work, so we'll be more than happy to share the literature as well. But about the slides, I think we can put together a nice compendium for all of you guys that are here with us today. because as I said earlier, we will pick your brains as well. So Agdona, how is the research collaboration to work with other researchers? Philip, wanna take that up?
Sorry, maybe you can, maybe Aidan, you can speak. Sorry, who gave the question?
Adugna was the one who asked, how is the research collaboration to work?
Maybe you can unmute and ask the question myself, because I don't really understand what you mean.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. My question is with regard to the collaboration among researchers. I am a researcher in one of the federal institutes here in Ethiopia. And if there is, the platform to collaborate and to work with, that's my question.
I'm not sure if this question is from me. Ginny, maybe you want to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think that it depends a lot on what type of topic do you want to be addressing, because something that we found, for example, with the app developers is that most of them are not researchers themselves. They are people that have an interest in the topic. Some of them have managerial skills, some of them have technical skills, but the research part for them becomes really complicated. And that's also when they start having some, roadblocks for developing apps, because they don't really know who to talk to in order to get reliable information. So I would imagine that a way to collaborate, it's not only between researchers, which of course sessions like these ones are for this. I mean, we come from different disciplines, and as in personal experience, I can tell you, coming from a sustainable consumption background, moving into interactive technologies, it was a 180-degree experience, because you face always these kind of questions about like, yeah, but sustainability is environment. Is like, oh guys, okay, let's just start from, and that's why I made a disclaimer at first, because I'm aware that for a lot of people working in sustainable consumption, the notion of gamification is still a little bit on the, let's say, more points, leaderboards and badges and technology part. So I think that collaboration between researchers has a lot to do with knowing what do you need, who do you want to talk to in terms of like expertise that you have and expertise that you want to get, and finding the right way to talk each other's language. Because when we talk across disciplines, we also find it quite challenging. Researchers with non-researchers, but people that can help us communicate our work in an applied way. I think that this is also something that is a lot about putting ourselves out there, not keeping it just among academia, but also like communicating our work with the world in a different way. So a lot of what we do is like try, for example, to make infographics of your work and make them public, I don't know, in LinkedIn or in groups that are related to your to your topic of interest, because that can also help you to connect with other audiences that not necessarily work on research themselves, but can benefit from your work and even give you more ideas for further research. Philip, please.
Yeah, so I want, Daniel wrote in the chat that you're welcome to join CAN SSCP and our group if you want to collaborate on this subject. In my presentation, I had the same as Ginny. I'm a researcher myself, but and an activist, but I was working with people who are not academic researchers. So that was a very interesting exercise, how to do very practical, non-scientific research for a very practical question in a real city situation. So let me see. Let me leave it at this moment.
Thanks, Philip. So are there any other comments? Because if you have any more questions, we would really like to really have the opportunity perhaps to have a very short break, 3-minute break, just to stretch a little bit before we move to the last part of our conversation, because we have 2 amazing presentations still waiting for us, and they are like very hands-on, very dynamic. So we want to have you all on board. So it is, there's another question. If we had a COVID moment with the climate and consumption had to stop, where would it begin to shut down and the impact? I think it depends a lot on where we are, But this is a very interesting question that I'm pretty sure we can also discuss later on, because it's something that requires input for a lot of voices, from a lot of voices. So my invitation to you now is to just like take 3 minutes. We're not closing anything, so just to stretch a little bit, we'll test Ashley's presentation and we restart in 2 minutes. Okay? So you can stay here. You're more than welcome to stay here. We're just gonna do like, we will pause the recording for a moment. Now I will continue. Thank you, Charles or Yin, whoever did that. So now, as I said, we have the second part of our program that is really hands-on examples of communicating in practice. And with that, I pass it on to my colleague, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And please, somebody let me know if my audio cuts out and I need to repeat anything. Okay. So I'll be speaking today about the field school that I founded here in Colonia, Uruguay, where I live, and just about a service learning, experiential learning approach to basically sustainability education. So basically what Rizoma Field School is, it's a organization, and my husband and I started it and founded it together. We host short 1 to 2 week study abroad trips here near our home. The school, quote unquote, is actually out in the field, and we work primarily with agroecological producers. So you see here in this picture, the Garcia family I'll be speaking about later, small scale family farmers. And so the school is literally going to different places with community partners and working hands-on with them. We primarily work with American universities, but we're open to working with international universities. We were considering a contract with secondary schools, like a private high school, corporate retreats. And basically the idea is we work with sustainable producers. So sometimes it's agroecological producers, sometimes it's working in bioconstruction, so sustainable construction methods, and various sustainable businesses. And the idea here, the theory here, is that we want to consider ideas in our quote unquote classroom about a future that's not only sustainable, but regenerative, meaning it doesn't just sustain itself, it actually makes the world better and more ecologically sound. And we're guided by the principle make the human and natural world healthier and more diverse, which includes social equality, freedom, and tolerance. Hence the study abroad exchange, cultural exchange aspect. And we also work from the idea that critical learning must take place in context. The idea for the field school grew out of my research, my dissertation research especially, but more or less in my research, I talked to people who produced food for their own consumption, and it made me realize that there was a whole world out there of sustainable producers, some of them formally known, many of them doing things informally in their homes or in spaces that are generally not seen to the wider public. So small scale farmers, but also people like homesteaders who produce things at home, craftspeople, skilled trades, sustainable or small scale brewers, vineyards, orchardists, this kind of thing. People interested in alternative transportation methods, restoration ecologists who do work in wild ecosystems, sustainable construction, and more. And basically my research found that practitioner networks find ways to work together and to bolster each other's activities beyond significant social barriers like geography, race, class, gender, and age that typically keep us from working together with others in the name of sustainability. So they're working together in the name of the practice rather than in the name of sustainability necessarily. So what I found was that people moved from basically exclusive social groups, something like a climate activism group, which would have certain kind of cultural markers that would have people participating, to more inclusive ones where they're able to work across ideological barriers. So I took this finding from my research and thought, why not have youth experience this kind of practice as a way of understanding sustainability. And so basically we found experiential learning as a way to empower young people, the sort of generation of climate activists, but through a hands-on curriculum, studying real-world sustainable solutions. So Rusoma Field School offers this sort of sustainability education, in-context learning with practitioners. And fundamentally, the goal is to give youth a sense of active citizenship. The kinds of service projects we're working on: we revitalize infrastructure, we plant trees, we dig fence posts, we weed, we harvest vegetables, and we sort of enhance sustainable recycling systems. In the social justice issues we address, we think about environmental conservation, we think about economic equity and civic engagement. The ultimate goals of this kind of approach is to get students to embrace sustainable lifestyles and to see them in practice, to build their own communities of practice when they return home. And we've had a lot of students go back to their university and start a composting program for their sorority or something like that. And it's a sort of community of practice. We're all going to get around this practice and sort of build networks that way. And then to be able to communicate to their in their home places, this sort of global experience and what it means for their specific context. Just a little bit of background about Colonia. It's a kind of, Uruguay is a small country. It's often overlooked. We've got a large culture of small-scale agriculture and animal husbandry. Colonia specific is a department of agroecology, earth building, and there's something called holistic grazing management, which is a sustainable way to produce animal agriculture. And Uruguay is a world leader in sustainability. We have almost 100% renewable electricity grid, South America's first sustainable public school. So it's a great sort of pilot country to bring students to think about what a sustainable livelihood looks like. I just wanted to share a few pictures of the community partners we work with. This is the Garcia family I mentioned before. They have a small, I think it's a couple acre piece of land to be able to produce food for their own consumption and a little bit of sales. This is us sitting around with the family sharing something called mate and asking questions of the practitioners, sharing insights, this sort of cross-cultural communication. This is what the garden looks like, all hand produced. Here on the left, we have building a compost bin, and we're building bioconstruction, a shed for vegetable and tool storage out of straw and mud. You can see there in the wheelbarrow. And the students love working with the mud. Here on the right, you can see a bioconstruction building completed with this sort of adobe walls on the inside. We worked with sort of hand fixing his road, his driveway in, and hand managing some agroecological production. I bring them to our field school. This is a ruin on my property, and we talk about some of the things we do on our property. They don't work on our property, but we show them things like our solar water heater, our gray water garden, and compost system, and the different systems we have in our home to try to bridge the gap to a developed world student sensibility. An environmental center we went to, Agua Dulce, similar kind of activities there. This is some fence building. The students leave with some practical experience too in some of these activities. Small scale brewery we work with that recycles their grains to regenerative cattle production. This Buenos Modales Community Center, where we did a small beach cleanup of plastic left on the beach. The students love to spend some time on the beach. We're nearby to a beach, so it's really nice to, at the end of the workday, to be able to relax on the beach together. And we're nearby this town, Colonia del Sacramento, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the students get to enjoy a cultural excursion as well when they're here. Just a picture of the yerba mate that people drink and sort of learning what that cultural part is all about. And I don't know how much time I have left. Ginny, do you know, are you keeping time?
You're kind of right now on your time, but You can take 2 more minutes. Don't worry.
Okay.
Take 2 more minutes. You're fine.
I'll just do 30 seconds. So basically, these are the last parts of student testimonials. Active citizenship and direct service have deep impacts, help other people's lives. Once you see it in person, you'll only want to do more to help. And then another student, I loved Uruguay and all the people we got to help. I'm currently in the process of setting up a recycling initiative in my sorority, taking baby steps and composting all of our leftover food in the backyard area. Hopefully we would like to start a small garden. Thanks. That's it for now.
Thank you, Ashley. Very inspiring, very nice as well. Fantastic story. So for those who just joined us now, we will continue with the last presentation of today, which is also very inspiring hands-on approach. And afterwards, we will have again another short Q&A with our 2 speakers before we open up for the group discussion. Okay, Valentina, how are you doing with your presentation? You want to show your slides or you want me to show them? Well, shall I share my screen?
No, it's fine. I can share it. I was just trying to handle it. Awesome. Yes, perfect. So should I just take over and start? Well, thank you so much for everybody who has come to our session and is wondering about ways that communication can make a difference for sustainable consumption and sustainable lifestyles. I'm Valentina Aversano Dearborn, and I am the co-founder and co-director of Forum Via, an educational NGO based in Europe, with volunteers all over Europe and members all over Europe, and also founder of a living and learning lab in Italy, with similar to actually what Ashley just said, with basically a farm that offers a learning experience. But what I'm going to present you today is actually a project that is co-funded by the European Union in the context of the Erasmus Plus funding scheme for high schools. And what we are putting together in the next 2 years, and have started earlier this year, is the Climate Went 1.5 program. It's an educational program that is based on storytelling missions that help students in high schools to achieve to discover solutions around climate change, and thereby also help to achieve the 1.5 degree climate goal. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share how what we found out, how education and storytelling can make a difference. So how did we start out? What was our motivation to start this project? If I say we are not only my NGO, Forum Via, but also Changemaker Italia che Cambia, the energy agency, which has a climate school network. And in our work, we have found that teachers in most countries don't get trained for climate education or media competence. So there is really a lack that we have perceived, which is worrying, especially in times where this is these are important topics. Then we also saw that very often, and that's also what Philip found in his study, people feel overwhelmed. They care about these topics, but they feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the issues and of the sustainability challenges that they are seeing in different areas. So we came together and we thought what we need to do, on what we want to do, is to offer schools a program that allows them to combine knowledge, which is usually what they do most of the time. They convey knowledge in a one-way communications way, to combine that actually with action, to motivate and give students a possibility for peer learning, beyond their classrooms, to use storytelling as a means for that in the digital age. So using also social media for that in a meaningful way. obviously needing then media literacy, so they are able to use media, and especially social media, in a critical way. And then we want to make the students feel like European citizens, eco-social citizens that feel empowered to get active for those challenges and don't feel overwhelmed anymore, right? So how do we do that? We want to increase their personal and professional growth, because we see a huge potential for those students when they finish their school. They're usually in their last years of high school, to go out and actually become active for Europe's future, and for the European Green Deal. So how do we do that? What do we put together for these high schools and for teachers? So we will put together a curriculum, a toolbox, and trainings. The curriculum will be mainly filled with knowledge about climate change, but also about, like I already said, media literacy. We have a toolbox for which we will also need your help later on, that we want to fill with learning resources that are already existent, that have already been proven and used and applied, infographics, and also everything that has to do with skill building for digital storytelling and knowledge building for climate action. And then as also I think Philip mentioned before, we also found that teachers especially need a lot of guidance in order to use those tools. So this is why we also develop trainings for teachers and guidebooks that help them. You've seen a lot of words popping up that say teaching for transformation, toolbox for transformation, trainings for transformation, but what is transformative learning? And I have here a short definition for you, which describes transformative learning as a theory that says that the process of actually perspective transformation, this is what we want to reach, right, has 3 dimensions. A psychological dimension that tackles changes in understanding of the self, a convictional dimension, which is when we are capable of revising our own belief systems, and then a behavioral dimension, which see that this is actually overlapping with what we heard before in the presentation of Daniel, that is addressing the elements that are very prevalent in communication for sustainable lifestyles. So behavior change, self-empowerment, and system change. To make our program, our educational program, effective, we really need to understand that how the perspectives, needs, and values of our target groups, so our actually students, are. And for this, we have Ashley, that you have just seen in the previous presentation, on our side, who is helping us to go through the need analysis that we did. We did interviews with dozens of German high school students, and did focus group interviews with Italian high school students, and she has helped us to go through that, analyze it, and Ashley is also helping us to present this and discuss this with people like you. And this is our first presentation, so I give the word to Ashley so she can give you some insights of what we have found so far.
Thank you, Valentina. We're doing a initial analysis here, speaking with the high school students, just trying to understand where they are to start, their approach to climate issues, what are the important aspects of their lives, and how does sustainability fit into their daily life. So just some brief findings from these initial qualitative research interviews. Students report feeling uncomfortable about environmental issues, but they also feel like these issues are disconnected from their day-to-day lives and socialization, similar to what we've heard in previous presentations. When their students were asked, what is important in their lives, the vast majority of them ranked friends, followed by family, and then school activities, not surprising for young students. When students were asked the question, if you have experienced something exciting or new about climate protection, could you imagine sharing it? And the majority answered, I would tell my boyfriend or girlfriend about it. So thinking about the most important relationships in their lives, again, not surprising for young students. Very few students reported doing anything significant in their lives in terms of climate action. I think thinking about the disconnect between their daily lives and routines and the larger concern they have for environmental issues. Next slide. There we go. The conclusions we had for the Climate Venture team, we're trying to think about how can we encourage students to integrate climate action into their everyday lives? How can we relate to what they care about? They care about their friends, their family. They're worried about school. They're obviously focused on their boyfriend or girlfriend. How can we relate that to their values? How can we integrate sustainability education in a way that makes sense with their schedules and pressures? They have to worry about grades. They're involved in sports. They have peer pressure with friends that they're concerned about. And the idea is that we must tie together the idea of positive actions that make sense in the context of their lives. So some examples we have, the Climate Venture team has come up with something like low CO2 or cost-free ways to spend time with friends. The idea that a good and healthy eco-life is available for almost free. And then a question from me as an external evaluator, I'm wondering how can a sustainable lifestyle also support connection to social life? So how can these things be a sustainability, sort of consumption or production, sustainable lifestyle, how can that support things like connection to family, connection to friends, service to a local community, or even getting students to think about, as they do when they leave Rizoma Field School, their future career or profession? How can they build sustainability into their whole life and not just think about it as something like a small decisions around consumption or something like that? I'll hand it back to you, Valentina.
Thank you, Ashley. And right to your last point that you have just raised is how can we get people that are building this into their whole life? I actually have the very honor to present a young girl that's sitting next to me that is 18 years old. It's Lena Stiefvater, so she's the voice of the youth. I might turn off the background so you can actually see both of us. She is one of those people. Lena, hello, Lena, thanks for being here today with us. She is one of those people that is actually already engaged in the student parliament of her school. She's a vegetarian. She defines herself as a feminist. And she says, I care for climate justice and sustainable food systems. So she's one of these people that we would like more of in this world. And so I'm curious. So she is a reflective person. She's engaged. She has changed her behavior. She tries to change the system. And she's here with me because she's actually engaging as a volunteer in our farm program for sustainable food systems. So Lena, I have some questions to you. I would like to know, since you have already kind of been so actively integrating sustainable lifestyles in your daily life, where do you get your information and inspiration from?
Well, it's actually quite embarrassing to say, but most of my information is from TikTok. You may know TikTok as a platform of dances or lip syncing, but you can use that platform completely different once you figured out the algorithm or the algorithm figured out you. Because once the algorithm gets that you're interested in those kind of subjects, you get more and more information about it, and really also of people that are connected to the topic, and you usually wouldn't get in contact with them if you didn't use TikTok. So yeah, that's my main source of inspiration and of information.
Okay, so interesting. Thank you. I think that comes as a surprise for some of the listeners. I would be curious, and I guess also others, how do you use social media then in general? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I use a variety of different social media platforms, just like, of course, TikTok, but also Instagram and WhatsApp. But Instagram and WhatsApp is mainly for my friends and for my family to communicate with them. But yeah, TikTok is for new ideas and yeah, new information and stuff.
Okay, that's actually similar to what we found out in our need analysis, that people are using it mostly passively, but then yeah, they are really curious to see what others post and to follow those examples. So in summary, what would you say is an advice that you could give us, scientists and activists that want to reach people, young people like you, and want to bring out our insights that we get from research or from experience about sustainable access? What could we do? What would you have said?
Yeah, well, now you would guess that I'd say that you just should use TikTok, but it's not that easy because it only like shows you things that you're already interested in. So you should rather focus on students, for example, that you go to the schools and give them some basic knowledge so that they like get interested by themselves, and afterwards TikTok will show them more and more information about those topics and give further information. So there needs to be a basic interest, otherwise social media won't work.
Okay, well, no, that is, thank you for sharing those few insights, because actually, yeah, thank you, Lena, very much. Maybe there's also questions from you afterwards to Lena. I have one more slide to share with you, because thank you, actually, that encourages actually to continue the way we went so far, because it's true that the algorithms, you have to have a general interest, you said before, on social media, so that you can actually you get those contents then tailored to you. So how do we create this first interest? Is we apply in our project the 3H approach in our educational program, which is the first H is for we address the head and the knowledge. So we create a knowledge base about climate, the SDGs, sustainability, sustainable access. And we try to build skills such as storytelling skills. Then we address the hands and the head, which is the action part. It's a very important part because we invite people, for example, you see a list here, through participation, so two-way streets, through cooperation with the students outside of their classroom, or people outside of the classroom. Service learning is something that was mentioned by Ashley before, also as an example. We invite them to go on micro adventures, do interviews with sustainable companies that also give them ideas for job considerations, etc., role games. So this is the action part. And then we have the third H, which is the heart, which is the emotion. And that was mentioned by many of you in the beginning in a successful, effective communication strategy, which is how do we involve that? And that was one of the questions we had also coming up, is through peer exchange, involving the people that the students care about, their friends, their family, involving social media so they can reflect on and find out about options for action, such as on an individual level, societal level, political level, and economical level, and then tell each other stories about something that works or doesn't work, and why they're frustrated about it or happy about it. And now this is giving you a vague insight, but we would be excited to see if you have examples of education or communication that we can also put into our toolbox for educators that will be accessible also, of course, beyond Europe for everybody as open source. So please share in the chat. I will share if you know any examples of videos or educational material that's already available that we can build on, then let us know on those topics. And you can find the link. I'll share it in the chat now. And yeah, and then I will say thank you for being here. And I don't know if I have time for question, but I'll give the word back to Ginny.
Thank you, Valentina.
Thanks a lot also to Lena again.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, but you were talking. So thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Lena. Thank you for this very inspiring presentation, because actually this is bringing us to the next part of our session today, in which we start already getting hands in action. Like all of us, people here in this group, we will have the opportunity to share also a little bit more about our experiences as well. Already, some of you already started, so thank you for sharing, because that's the purpose of today's presentation, to open this dialogue, not only to get to know what a few of us are doing, but get to know what we all are doing and how can we actually start cross-pollinating our activities. Like Adugna was already sharing about some activities in Switzerland, and I think we can also get more insights. But before we move into the into the group discussion, I would like to share a couple of questions that are in the chat that were mainly for Lena. Thank you, Lena. Very inspiring presentation as well. And yeah, I mean, I think at this point, everybody, whoever wants to open your camera, please feel free to do it. So, Stefan, you had one question for Lena. Would you like to ask it yourself?
Yeah, sure. Lena, it's so interesting because I'm the millennial guy, so I'm not into TikTok. I know TikTok, but I'm not really. So, but you said, okay, you inform yourself on TikTok, and then, so far as I know TikTok, you start some kind of search, and then the algorithm gives you more content on your what you ever searched for. So you started the search and then you got more and more information on this topic. So the question is, how could you bring your peers to start this search for information, and how can we adapt and how can we change? Because that the algorithm works, but you have to start the algorithm to bring you into the right direction. You know what I mean? So how can I encourage young people to start the TikTok or whatever algorithm to give them content on the sustainability issue topic?
Yeah, it's really hard. I completely understand where this question is coming from, and there's not really an answer, because yeah, there has to be a general interest, and yeah, you can tell young people about climate change, and then they can develop an interest by themselves, or they don't. And if they develop it, TikTok will help them and give them more information and stuff. But it's really hard to get a general interest, like that somebody wants to change a thing if they have their comfortable life and stuff. So yeah, it's not that easy, but if you like, it's definitely an opportunity you should consider. That that's just like, yeah, easy to spread information.
Maybe you can say something about the example, how you found out about the WWOOF network, because yeah, right. My farm and living lab is part of the WWOOF network, which is a solidarity farming platform around the world that hosts volunteers. And you found out about that on TikTok, you said,
yeah,
right?
You know, yeah, exactly. That was like, I graduated high school last year, and I was looking what I could do after I graduated school. And that's why TikTok figured out that I was interested in those kind of stuff. I don't know how TikTok did it. It was the algorithm. It's kind of scary. And then there was that one girl on TikTok, and she told about her daily routine living on an organic farm in Italy. And I liked the idea. She was just feeding the chicken and stuff, and I got inspired. And then I looked at WWOOF on the internet, and yeah, that's when I decided I want to go to Italy, and that's how I came here. And now I'm learning so much about organic food and sustainable food consumption, food production, and that was the first step of my journey, learning about food consumption, and that's how it worked for me. But it's definitely not that everybody like that. It doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for everybody like this.
Thank you, Lena. But I think it's already a great inspiring example, and also an opportunity for us to start thinking, how can we really start, putting the spotlight in the algorithms? How can we manipulate the algorithms? Yeah. But it's fantastic. Thank you for sharing your story. Philip, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yeah, I also wrote in the chat. I want to go back to what Valentina said about how to connect your daily life activities, what you love, your friends, your family, your sports, your TikTok, and climate issues, right? So I have a question for Lena here. So my idea is that it would be possible for students and high school students to basically ask the question, to investigate in their own lives, what their contribution is towards the climate problem and to the climate solution. In other words, the house you live in, the furniture you have, the clothes you have, the car you drive, the holidays you take, right? It is relatively easy to make a project to figure out the carbon emissions of all these activities that you are involved in a daily basis, and then compare it with your friends, and then to brainstorm about how you could reduce these carbon. So, Lena, what do you think about this idea?
Well, it's definitely the right step in that direction, that you just talk about it a lot, and it's just that yeah, you just have to talk about it and put the mind of the students into that topic. And I mean, it's an interesting topic and it concerns us all. So at some point we'll start to look things up by ourselves, because it's about our future and we're concerned about our future. So yeah, that's definitely the right step.
So I also would like to put this to the whole group. Maybe not to answer now, but just as a suggestion of something that we could do.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip, because actually this is, and also Valentina, Lena, Ashley, I don't know if anybody has some questions for Ashley as well, because right now we have the opportunity to start our group discussion, but if anyone has a specific question for Ashley, speak up now. Nope. Okay, so we hope that more issues will come during the discussion, because right now, since we are a relatively small group, we're going to keep it cozy, and we would like to hear from you as well. We will share a couple of questions with all of you, and please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat, so we can have this nice dialogue going about what are we doing and what can we do together. So you may remember these that happened about 1.5 hours ago, when we started already talking about approaches, that examples for making communication and education more effective, like something that we can already recall, right? And so one of the first things that we would like to do with you is to have a very short round of introductions. So personally, like for you guys, if you want, of course, just let us know, what are your personal successes in communicating sustainable lifestyles to your friends, to your neighbors, to your family. Lena already shared with us a little bit about her experience with TikTok. Daniel was telling us a little bit about woofing. So yeah, who would like to share a little bit, like who you are and how do you communicate with those close to you and those that you care about? Adam, would you like to speak up, or you would like me to read there? You can open your mic. You're among friends.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yes. This is very interesting to me, because I am doing a career change. My PhD is in psychology. I've just gotten so interested, involved in sustainability. And the thing that has driven me really is where I live. I'm coming from a bit of a different place than a lot of the speakers today in talking about farming and things like that, which I think is wonderful. But this whole sustainable consumption is like literally thrown into my face every day. This is not a question that I'm asking, but it's what I see. I live in Panama. I live on the Panama Canal, and I can see daily the many ships loaded. I mean, they are so big that sometimes it looks like 3 huge hotels on one ship are floating through the canal from the Pacific to the Atlantic, or the Atlantic to the Pacific, loaded with thousands of containers and consumable goods. So this is kind of where my journey is beginning. It's just like talking about it almost makes me sick to my stomach. It's just unbelievable when you see this kind of consumption in front of you every day. So I'm not really asking a question or anything. I'm just sharing what my experience currently is, and that I'm beginning this path because I really believe in sustainable consumption. If we don't get a handle on it, maybe this sounds rude, but I don't think any of these other things are going to help, because it's the consumption that's driving all the petrofuels and all these other things. So I don't know, maybe I have a little bit outer perspective now because of where I live, what I see every day, but this is where I'm beginning right now.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And it's absolutely like one of the reasons why we want to have this dialogue with all of you, because all the different perspectives is what actually can help us to find a common solution or several solutions that can help. I mean, we also have the Black Friday approaching. That's something that started in the US. Now it's like spreading like a disease all over the place with people just, you know, starting already making lists. So it is very important for us to think as well, like what are these different perspectives for consumption? And on the other hand, what are we going to do about it? So what can we do about it? What are we doing? And thank you for sharing that thought. Is there anyone else who would like to contribute? Philip is extending an invitation. I think this invitation goes for everyone in this group. If you want to join our group, the working group on communication, you can see that we are very active both in theory and practice. So we would love to hear more about your experiences, but also like co-create with you. Is there any other comments to this question? Anyone who would like to share as well a little bit of your personal experience? I see the chat. Okay, anyone else who would like to share? Because we have more inspiration. As I told you, our plan was to pick your brains, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to squeeze the best out of you during the session. And so we could see during our the first part that we were talking about what can make the education and the communication more effective. And you could see throughout all the presentations how we were talking about transparency, about emotions, tailoring to the target group. So we would also like to hear a bit about your takeaways from today. What inspired you? Is there anything that gave you an insight? Anything that you could say, like we saw someone, like you were already sharing some of your practices. So of course, we would like to invite you to join our group and let us know more about your practices. But also, like if you can share in here, what are your main takeaways from today? I now know a lot of people is just like with the cameras off because they don't want me to see like, you. Okay, someone is writing in the chat. Oh, it's okay. If internet's not stable, I think we all will be having internet problems today. Any thoughts about today's session? Come on, guys. It's been quite an interesting, I'm checking the time, 1 hour, 40 minutes. So anyone would like to share something about today's takeaways? Yeah, well, maybe it's a lot. We need to let it sink. I like the three areas of behavior change: self-empowerment and systems change. Yep. Yeah, Valentina, you want to say something?
Oh, no, I just saw Stefan's comment and I was talking with Lena about it because he said he's still inspired from the TikTok confession. But he at the same time, he worries if the algorithm is not maybe showing just inspirational material on the topic of, for example, climate action, but maybe misinformation about climate change or disinformation. How about that, and how can people differentiate? So that's something he took away as a thought, apparently. And yeah.
Yes, it's true. TikTok is quite dangerous. I mean, I know a lot of people that use it like wrong or in another way than I do. I just figured out how I can use it, and it works the best for me. It's the best way to inform myself because of the aspects I've given to you, but it's definitely really dangerous, and there are so many ways you can use it wrong.
And I think that's also where our project, for example, comes back in, where we have this educational program where critical media competence that we want to bring to schools actually will exactly address those topics, not just glorify those channels, but describe them as they are, with the opportunities that they offer, but also with the risks that they offer, because I think we cannot ignore that they are around and they are in such high use. But it's important to know how they work and be aware of the risks, and especially for teachers, because they have daily, they are daily in touch with the main user groups, which are young people like Lena. So Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not only educating the young people, but it's also educating the educators, right? We need to see how to develop these digital competence as well, like to understand media and like, you know, look to be able to discern like what's the content, what's right, what's true, and also like start also seeing how it works for us in terms to help us moving the agenda of sustainable consumption. And well, just want to bring another question to you guys, but I'm doing something strange with the slides. So is there anything that you guys would like to try to move forward? First thoughts? Because we could see that there are a lot of comments happening in the chat and we'll really appreciate them. So Philip is asking, how can we as aging researchers collaborate with young people with who know how to use TikTok? I think this is a very big question. It's a great one. I don't know if anyone has another idea about how to do this. Or you want to share something about this? We don't need to have all the answers right now.
Well, well, the conversation we now have with Lena is a very good example of, at least for me, a very new perspective. So I would like to invite Lena to a meeting of her working group to basically explore this a little bit further, somewhere in the next few months or so.
Thank you, Philip. I guess that this is also one way to start as well, to make it like what we were discussing earlier, making research accessible and the practice, like, create these connections. So of course, Elena or anyone else that is also like, I don't know, Ashley as well, your students or of the other projects, the one that we just read in Switzerland or your projects are willing to join us and to give us also the youth perspective. I think this is the way to get this dialogue started, right? That just to really have the opportunity to hear everybody out and to see like, how can we cooperate together? And speaking of invitations, I would like to move on to another invitation. And I don't
Jenny,
know,
I just have one comment on the last question, which is, I think one systemic way in which older researchers or academics can be involved with youth is many researchers or academics work in institutions of higher education. And we can absolutely bring more sustainability or in context learning into the classroom in university levels. And this is something I advocate for pretty strongly. And I might ask Daniel to share information about a book that he's editing, an edited volume where I make that case in one of the chapters. But the idea being, you know, I think some of our sustainability education in universities is too theoretical and it's not enough hands-on, it's not enough connecting to community, it's not enough meeting students where they're at and in their interests, in their lives. And so I'm doing this with my model with Riselma Field School, but I believe that people can do experiential learning in their own communities, even in the university town where they live, get out into the world and see sustainability in action.
Thank you, Ashley. Valentina is mentioning, remember the 3H approach, the head, the heart, and the hands. That's a beautiful analogy. Philip, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
And
so yeah, I love the 3H approach, Valentina, and also I love your presentation, Ashley, and what you're doing there, and I think it's very inspirational. And not all of us can go into the countryside to explore this. So I think that going into the city and see what's happening there and what we can do there. But yes, I'm totally convinced that addressing especially high school students who can influence their parents about their consumption habits is a very important thing. And I also want to draw your attention to what the link to Daniel put in the chat box about art and lifestyles. I think it is a very unexplored issue, at least by us, how art can contribute to a different, basically different way of living. That more connectivity, more understanding of our relationship with nature, and more sustainability. So thanks Danielle.
Fantastic, thank you. I see that Agdugna, you have your hand up.
Yes, Jenny. You know, I'm very much interested, and I'm very much happy for today's session. You know, I am also in.
Oh, we lost you. Adugna, I'm afraid that we have some connection issues. We could not really hear you. Could you please type it in the chat? Adugna? Sorry, we could not hear you. I'm afraid he cannot hear us either. Well, I hope that he can come back. His connection was not really helping us. Yeah, hopefully Adugna can come back, because that was, I was very curious to hear what he wanted to say. But yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the possibility to collaborate further, to learn more about what we are doing. And with that comes the invitation, because this is, of course, not the end of the story, but actually the beginning of what we hope could be even more interesting and larger working group with a lot more activities and more impact to make, much more impact to make in the future. So Daniel, would you like to say something about this? Daniel, off you go.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So maybe that's a nice wrap up, because I think it's the more of a beginning of a conversation and really an end point here. And we are hosting here in Wageningen in collaboration with two major networks in the field. One is SCORAI, the Sustainable Consumption Research and Action Initiative, and SSCP, the European Roundtable on Sustainable Consumption and Production. So two networks that have several hundreds, if not thousands, members. We are hosting a joint conference in 2023. We are hoping to bring people together also for an in-person event that we all have been craving for over the past years, and to make this really the to-go-to place for our community, sustainable consumption and production practitioners, researchers, policymakers, to exchange about recent developments, insights, and also ways forward in the field. But having said that, it's an in-person conference, I also want to flag that we learned a lot in the past years about bringing people from other places in, about reducing travel, emissions, etc. So we will also have an online participation option for that conference. We have already secured been able to recruit and win over excellent keynote speakers for that conference, high-level politicians, amazing people, Julia Heimberger, who's both an excellent researcher and an activist, a role model for us maybe. So that's very proud. And the flavor of the conference will really be to bring together the academic world, so recent research insights, and policymakers and practitioners in so-called dialogue debate formats. So we really hope to also bridge those worlds with the conference that we are designing. And if you're a researcher and also interested in publishing, there will also be a couple of special issues that are currently lined up, so that you can also use the conference to publish your research. Yeah, we have a deadline, a submission deadline that is end of the month. So you have 18 more days to submit a proposal. You can follow us on Twitter. We have an extensive website by now, scp-conference-2023.com. And I think it's already in the chat. So yeah, join us in Wageningen next year and to continue these conversations.
Excellent, Daniel. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Because actually, just to close, as Philip is saying, we would like to put together a presentation, like a session, just as the one that we had today online. And it would be amazing to have also your participation as part of this session. So we are going to get together on November the 16th. I think it's 4:30 p.m. Central European time. So if you are interested in joining and put forward your case, your reflection, and also be part of the session, please join us us so we can just design the session together, just as we did with this one. With that, I would like to thank you all for being with us today, for your questions, for your interest. Also, I would like to thank you on behalf of the members of the working group on communications, and also to you guys for sharing your input and for the great work that you put together. And without further ado, I just like to thank you and wish you a fantastic rest of the day wherever you are. Wonderful weekend, and looking forward to seeing you in the next sessions, and of course to see most of you in November 16th to put our session together so we can have a great time together in Wageningen and exchanging some more knowledge and action. So with that is from our side, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Technical issue, Charles and Jen will do the favor of sending the video later on, so don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will upload it on the YouTube too. Thank you.
Thanks to you guys also.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Great work.
Anytime, thanks. So, well, Lena, very nice to meet you. Hope you're enjoying your time in the farm.
Yeah, it was nice. Thank you. And I have a great time. Yeah.
Valentina is making you squeeze olives.
Oh, no, I haven't